Hi, I'm Rosetta Goddard of the Middle Country Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode in our History Bites series. Today we will discuss Margaret Chase Smith, who was the first woman to actively seek the presidential nomination of a major political party. Margaret Madeline Chase was born on December 14, 1897, in Skowhegan, Maine, the oldest of 6 children, to George Emery, the town barber, and Carrie Murray Chase, a waitress, store clerk, and shoe factory worker. After graduating from Skowhegan High School in 1916, Chase took jobs as a teacher, telephone operator, and office manager for a woolen mill and on the staff of a small newspaper. In 1930, she married Clyde Harold Smith, an accomplished local politician. In 1936, Clyde Smith was elected as a Republican to the House of Representatives for the 75th Congress. Margaret managed his Washington office and served as president of the Business and Professional Women's Club of Maine. She also worked on behalf of the Maine Republican Committee. When Clyde suffered a heart attack in 1940, he urged her to run in his stead in the election that year. Before his death on April 8, 1940, the congressman told voters, "I know of no one else who has the full knowledge of my ideas and plans or is as well qualified as she is to carry on these ideas or my unfurnished work for the district." 2 months later, she was chosen in a special election to complete his term. Almost immediately, she displayed the independent judgment that became characteristic of her political career by breaking with her Republican colleagues to vote in September in favor of the Selective Service Act. In that month, she was elected to a full term. In the 1940 general election, Smith ran on a platform of military preparedness, including expansion of the Navy, which played well in her shipbuilding district, and support of old age pensions and assistance, which appealed to the state's large elderly population. She portrayed herself as a moderate who, in contrast to liberal feminists, would work within the established order. She employed that argument for many later campaigns. Smith drew upon her experience campaigning with her husband, particularly his ability to strike up personal relationships with voters. Smith won the general election over Democrat Edward Beauchamp with 65% of the vote. After her 1940 campaign, Smith was re-elected to the succeeding Congresses with relatively little challenge, defeating her opponents with 60% or more of the vote. Smith was an active member of the Naval Affairs and Armed Services Committees. Her position gave her power to award shipbuilding projects in Maine. It also made her an expert on military and national security matters, leading to her participation in an investigation of the construction of destroyers and the inspection of bases in the South Pacific. In addition, Smith participated in a trip to observe the post-war reconstruction in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Though she expressed concern for the speed of Soviet influence in Eastern Europe, Smith remained very wary of domestic communist fears. She voted against legislation to make the House Select Committee on Un-American Activities permanent. As a member of the Armed Services Committee, Smith passed her landmark legislative achievement in the House, the Women's Armed Forces Integration Act. With a wartime peak enrollment of about 350,000, women were still considered volunteers for the armed services and did not receive any benefits. In April 1947, while chairing the Armed Services Subcommittee on Hospitalization and Medicine, Smith passed a bill giving regular status to Navy and Army nurses, well accepted by her House colleagues because it covered women in traditional Angel of Mercy roles. When the Armed Forces Integration Act, providing for the permanent inclusion of all uniformed women in the military, easily passed the Senate in July 1947, Smith faced a greater challenge pushing the bill through the House. Opponents of the Armed Services Committee amended it over Smith's lone dissenting vote, significantly curtailing women's rights and benefits by offering them reserve status. The House passed the committee's version. In an effort to restore the bill's original intent in the conference committee, Smith appealed to her personal friend, Secretary of Defense James V. Forrestal, who gave her his full backing. Smith prevailed when the House accepted a version of the legislation granting women regular status on June 2, 1948. President Harry S. Truman signed the bill into law 10 days later, just weeks before he racially integrated the armed forces by executive order. In 1948, she ran successfully for a seat in the Senate, winning it by a record in Maine. She quickly established herself as an outspoken legislator of high integrity and considerable influence. Smith was generally liberal on domestic issues, often backing New Deal legislation proposed by Democratic President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And she was a strong supporter of national defense and security. Although a staunch anti-communist, she was nevertheless the first Republican senator to condemn Senator Joseph R. McCarthy's anti-communist witch hunts, delivering a memorable Declaration of Conscience on the Senate floor in 1950. Her opinion that President John F. Kennedy should use nuclear weapons against the Soviet Union prompted Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev to dub her the devil in disguise of a woman. Re-elected by large majorities in 1954, 1960, and 1966, Smith served in the Senate longer than any other woman. She was considered as a vice presidential candidate in 1952. After months of denying rumors that she would seek the top of the Republican ticket or the vice presidential nomination, Senator Margaret Chase Smith announced her run for president in January 1964. "I have few illusions and no money, but I'm staying for the finish," she noted. "When people keep telling you can't do a thing, you kind of like to try." Smith embarked on her typical grassroots campaign, losing every primary but picking up a surprising high of 25% of the vote in Illinois. At the 1964 Republican Convention, she became the first woman to have her name put in for nomination for the presidency by a major political party. Receiving the support of just 27 delegates and losing the nomination to Senate colleague Barry Goldwater, it was a symbolic achievement. To the surprise of many across the country, Maine voters turned the Venerable Smith out of office in 1972, during her bid for a fifth consecutive term. Prior to the election, Smith had given serious consideration to retiring, but charges that she was too old, at age 74, to serve as a senator had motivated her to run for re-election. The Democratic nominee, Maine U.S. Representative William Dodd Hathaway, emphasized Smith's age. He also claimed Smith was inaccessible and inattentive to Maine's concerns, citing the fact that she did not maintain an office in the state. Smith lost the election by 27,230 votes, a margin of 53 to 47%. Smith resettled in her hometown of Skowhegan to oversee the construction of the Margaret Chase Smith Library Center, the first of its kind to focus its collection on the papers of a female member of Congress. In 1989, President George H.W. Bush awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. Margaret Chase Smith died on May 29, 1995, at the age of 97 in Skowhegan. I'd like to thank you all for joining us for today's episode. If you enjoyed it, click like, and if you watched on YouTube, hit subscribe. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.